So let's jump in and Kevin, just give us an overview on yourself, maximizing commerce, and why you're here too.
Yeah, great question. So I've been selling on Amazon myself since 2015. I dabbled in a little bit of retail arbitrage, and I remember the first day I sent stuff in, I ended up getting a sale the day the goods were checked in, and it was just this rush of adrenaline, and I've been literally addicted since. So I don't really have addictions other than I think the thumb thing on the app. And so pretty much since then, I've been learning as much as I can about the platform and trying to share with others what I have learned. Um, in addition to having a YouTube channel and podcast, which we mentioned before, I also worked with a gentleman named Scott Volker on a in-person event called Brand Accelerator Live, which we had to make a virtual event this past year because of, well, the thing we all know about. It's been happening around the world. And also have hosted a few virtual summits on my own as well, which Payoneer was a sponsor of one of those, which I appreciate. And, really what it comes down to, I think it's probably because my mom is a retired school teacher. My sister is a principal in an elementary school. My dad taught at a community college at one time. So I think it's just maybe education is in my blood. So I just love helping other people figure all this stuff out, because I truly believe the rising tide will help lift all ships along the way here.
Very nice. I don't have as much. Oh, sorry. And this too is just to highlight that Kevin speaking from experience. So he himself is the brand owner, selling on Amazon Canada, seeing success obviously in 2020, and we'll jump into that a little bit more. So Kevin, this is one of the things that you wanted to talk about here, and when you launch onto a new marketplace, it's not as simple of just I'm going to go throw 10,000 SKUs or however many SKUs you have up and, cross your fingers and hope for the best. There's a number of steps that we have to go through. So I'll let you jump into this one if you'd like.
Sure. So yeah, this is basically a fairly repeatable process that, yes, maybe the form you have to fill out is a little different, but one of the things I wanted to reiterate that TJ mentioned is, if you already understand Amazon and you have a product that works on Amazon in the US, chances are it's going to work in another country and at least give you some additional sales. And, there was the screenshot that TJ had shown earlier of, the holiday season for me. It's like 70 something $1,000 in sales over the previous 30 days, unlike Christmas Eve. But if you added all that together, it was something like $112,000 in sales. So think about how much money I would have left on the table if I didn't take the initiative. Maybe initiative is the wrong word. If I hadn't spent the time to figure this part out. And so, if you don't do these things to at least test out, like TJ said, maybe one marketplace at a time, you won't get any results. And so, the first thing to do is to figure out, okay, where is it I want to begin? And so I personally recommend starting in Canada because it's fairly simple. I wouldn't overlook Mexico. I'm starting to figure out Mexico on my own end. So again, another reason I was excited to be here, not just as someone presenting, but also as I feel like I'm always a student. And then the next thing you want to do is validate if your product will sell. And so pretty much any tool you like to use, whether it's Jungle Scout, Helium 10, whatever, chances are it's going to work in throughout North America or in Europe. And so you can at least get a sense of, are people purchasing similar products to mine? And then if they are, it's at least worth testing out. And then what you want to do is you want to register with whatever government there is, and we can talk more about that. I have you can download this if you want to go into Canada. It's canadachecklist.com. And there I walk through a little bit more in depth for the Canada portion, but the steps are fairly, from a high level, they're going to be the same no matter the country. Then you got to add your listings in each marketplace. And then you want to send in inventory. You don't have to send in a lot. And so this is one thing that trips people up is like, well, if I'm ordering a container at a time for the US, does that mean I need to order a container for Mexico? Well, no, whatever, your sales might be. So if you're looking at maybe an additional 10% bump in sales for that marketplace, you'd need 10% of the product in the inventory. And oftentimes to start off with, you might just take whatever your existing shipment is and just send a little bit, redirect it into Canada or Mexico, wherever the case is. And then, there are strategies to maximize currency. So as TJ had pointed out in one of the slides, whenever money changes hands from one currency to the other, you lose a little bit. And so what you want to do is do things to maximize that. And so, if you can have Amazon take like your PPC, for example, out of your disbursements, use a holding account of some sort. And full disclosure, I am a client of Payoneer, and they're who I use to receive funds from marketplaces like Amazon. And then what you want to do is, now you got this money coming in from all these different marketplaces, and you want to rinse and repeat and keep adding on more little squares in your checkerboard of your empire.
One of the things, Mike, that I think is important here and is to validate that your product will sell. No matter what marketplace, even if you're expanding to a different domestic marketplace, there might not be the need. And last week we had James Thompson on with us, and one of the points that really stuck with me that he said is, you don't want to be expanding to a new marketplace and creating a new category. So, either figure out how your product fits into an existing category, whether there's a lot of competition or not, and that's for you to decide from a business risk perspective. Kevin, on to our neighbors to the north. I will hand this over to you and jump in as appropriate.
All right, let's do it. Let's talk about Canada. So, the thing I like about Canada, and this is kind of more of a high level kind of putting all these pieces here together, is it's, I think, one of the simplest but yet overlooked marketplaces Amazon has. So one of the things that's really nice is you do tend to have less competition. So, Canada last year was, and I'm still tabulating the final numbers for the year, but at least when I was in stock, because like many people, I had some stocking issues last year in my own business. But when I was in stock, it was similar to what we showed in that one screenshot, where if you took my US sales, Canada was an extra 22% bump on sales. So when you think about the things you might do in your business to try to get another 10, 20, 22%, whatever the case is, Canada's up there. And we can't guarantee what those sales will look like, but if you don't try, you'll never know. So like Mike had said, what you want to do is, whatever the marketplace it is, send in something to test it out. And so another nice thing about Canada, it is English speaking. And I would say, compared to the US, their English is much closer to US English than, say, even English is. So if you go into the UK, they start using some different words to describe things. So that means the keywords people use to search for your products tends to be a little different. So it makes that transition even easier. And the culture is very similar to the US. And I think some of the things is with, things like taxes and things of that nature, it's all based on English common law. And so the US, like all our laws for the most part, are based on English common laws. Same thing, in England, same thing in Canada, Australia. So a lot of these countries that are used to be part of the UK empire, so to speak, the laws kind of flow the same. So if you kind of understand how things work with the government in the US, it's not that far off. And what's not a bullet point here is, I'll say their government is like, if you ever heard the stereotypical things said about Canadians, that they're like super nice and helpful. Well, their government is that way too. So if you have questions on forms and things like that, they want to work with you. They're very welcoming. It's not like, who are you, this American who wants to sell stuff in our country? It's they want you there. And so I think the inventory logistics are pretty simple compared to, like, if you're shipping across the pond to the UK. And as you mentioned before, oftentimes people think like, oh, well, Europe. Yes, there's more people in Europe than there are in Canada, but Canada is great because, it's right there. And with the less competition, your sales increase, I have found last year, was a higher increase in sales year over year than it was in the US. Which makes Canada a really nice thing for, what's not really all that difficult. So if you're shipping goods into the country, I think you can even recoup some of your additional costs for shipping it north of the border by being able to, sometimes just pass along whatever additional costs you have onto the customer. And then the nice thing is the sales tax is similar to the US, but there's an asterisk there, and I think it's a lot simpler. So yes, most states have what's called, in the US, marketplace facilitator laws, meaning they're requiring Amazon to collect on your behalf. I live in Florida. There is no marketplace facilitator law. So once a month, I get to file to the Florida Department of Revenue and send in sales tax for the state of Florida. In Canada, for the most part, and this is now getting into we're not providing tax advice, but generally speaking, at least when you're getting started, you're going to register with the federal government, and that's going to cover you for most provinces in Canada, and you only file once a year. And it's a pretty simple form. I DIY'd it myself the first few years. I don't necessarily recommend that. There's good people that can do it relatively inexpensively, but I would not let the taxes get in your way. And when it comes to income tax, the way it works is with the treaties between Canada and the US, generally speaking, sales tax collected minus you even will subtract some things out as credits. That's going to go to the local government. And at the end of the year, you'll owe whoever your government is for income tax. So I pay Uncle Sam every year for the profits I made off of what I sold in Canada. And I even get a 1099. So for those Americans watching this, they know what probably familiar with the 1099. For those who are not familiar with the 1099, it's basically the American form that says it reports to the IRS what my sales were in a particular location. So in this case, I get a 1099 form for Canada, just like I get one for the US. So taxes are relatively simple there. Next up on the next slide, I think I have another slide there.
Yep. Just to add one thing on that is
Sure.
Payoneer actually has a VAT tax portal where you're now able, as of last month, able
Nice.
to pay directly to the Canadian authorities with any Canadian balance that you're holding. So what that does is eliminates the need to send an international bank wire to the Canadian authorities for taxes.
That's actually a big savings, and I'm glad you said that because I wasn't even 100% sure that I've heard that was coming down the pike. So I'm excited to do that because I got to do my filing for last year. So I will be filing using Payoneer to do that. So that will save me a good amount of money for moving money around twice, so I don't lose that twice conversion. Now, just to compare the marketplaces real quick, the population is a little bit more than 10% of the US population. They have a dollar, just like we have a dollar, but it's a different dollar. Right now, the dollar, when you're repatriating money, at least into the US from Canada, it's become more favorable. So people tend to pay a little bit extra over there than what they do in the US. With the direction the US dollar is going versus the Canadian dollar, it's actually looking better and better right now. I mean, it could fluctuate the other direction, but I tend to find in, very westernized countries, you don't have to worry too much about, huge swings. It might be a little bit here and there, but right now it's actually in our favor. So it's going in a good direction. And one of the nice things about Canada is just like in the US, they take their selling price and then they add sales tax in. And that might, for people in the US, like, why is that even a big deal? In Europe, you have to account for, 1/6 of your selling price. For example, in the UK is VAT. And so there's all these other complications with it. VAT is like much more complicated than GST is in Canada. And like I said before, you're just doing one filing a year if you have less than 1.5 million Canadian dollars in sales in Canada. So it's relatively simple. And like that in Europe, you do get credits. So point being, just because you are collecting this money that you're supposed to pay to the government, you don't necessarily have to owe all that to the government because you're going to subtract out certain things. Like in Canada, they charge GST on top of the fulfillment fees Amazon charges you for, and then you're usually going to pay some sort of GST at the border. That's their goods and services tax. I should clarify that. But basically, their sales tax is added on at the border, and it's added on top of fulfillment fees. Whatever you pay ahead of time, you will subtract what you owe the government at the end of the year. So in essence, your customers paying you back for those charges that you're having to pay.
Yeah, it's pretty good. And we want to highlight a little bit of your personal success in Canada. Kevin, one of the things that I've heard is that, if you're selling in the US, just in terms of setting expectations, from what I've heard from sellers is you can expect to do about 10 to 15% of what you do in the US in Canada as you do on the US. Is that similar for you?
Yeah, it historically had been around 15% for me, but last year
Nice.
it's more in the 20 some percent. And I think some of it is the challenges weren't as magnified there that they were here. And I think also Americans, this might be a stereotypical statement, and Canadians, if you're watching this, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, but I tend to think Americans, like there's a little bit more of like love of entrepreneurialism. There's a lot of great sellers in Canada, so I don't want to take that away. But I think Americans tend to like go after things like there's a lot of shiny object followers in the US trying to sell on Amazon in the US, and people even across the world trying to sell on Amazon in the US. A lot of those people don't even think about going into other countries. So I think it has widened the gap for me of I still do more in the US, but how much I'm able to generate outside of the US in places like Canada has gone up. And so my growth year over year was significantly higher. So like around the holidays, I had high single digit growth for, in dollars in the US, whereas in Canada it was 45%, when you compare dollars. Now that's a Canadian dollars, so it's not the same as US dollars and units. It went up, healthy double digits. But point being, people are willing to pay for things. And I've said this before, hopefully that's what this story is telling there too, is people are willing to pay a little bit extra for products in Canada. I don't believe in price gouging, but people are willing to pay for if you have a product that's of value. And I don't get complaints about pricing in Canada either.
Yeah, I think the next slide that you had here was talking about some other seller experiences on Canada or in Canada.
Yeah. So, I don't want people to think it's like just me that, on Canada, I do have a service where I help people get launched in places like Canada and the UK. We'll start in the bottom right-hand corner. That's Annie. She's one of my, she was one of my clients on my Done For You service. Actually, if you want to hear her story, she was recently on my podcast a few weeks ago. But she realized she was just leaving money on the table by not going into other countries because, her product sells in the US. People have similar needs in Canada. So she was just leaving money on the table. And, really her regret was she wished she had done it sooner. And then that's Lavelia, someone who I'd helped out. She's also been on my podcast, and she and her husband have a very successful 7-figure brand. They're doing about 50 to 100 units a day outside of the holiday season in Canada. And that's sales they're getting that they wouldn't have gotten if they didn't take their products and offer them for sale. And they're getting similar numbers to that in UK as well. So, for them, they're talking about, an extra 100 to 200 units a day of product that they wouldn't have gotten had they not offered their products for sale. And then there on the left-hand side is James. He's someone who, this is actually a pre-COVID number of almost 35%, 34.77%. You can see there in the middle of that paragraph of what his Canada sales were relative to his US sales. And so, when we say 10 to 15%, like that makes sense because the population is in that kind of range. Sometimes people do a lot better. One of the things I think holds people back sometimes from getting success in other marketplaces is, let's say they have a catalog of 200 products and they only send in 10 of them, well, that might, make it so they don't get quite as good of returns. But, when you compare products, you never know until you test it out, but there's a lot of good ways to bring in revenue in other marketplaces.